Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
It's time for the post pod. The post pod. Here is the post pod with Marc and V. Does that work?
I like that. It's really catchy. Kind of reminds me of like I don't know, 50s like commercial or something.
Black and white.
Yeah, totally. Okay, Herman. Hidden Champions.
Hidden champions.
Yeah. It's, to me, you know what's really interesting to me? There's always this idea of like, what makes a great company? And he studied it for 40 years, or 35 years.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. Some of the things aren't that surprising. And like, you know, if you ask any leader in an organization, do you have an ambition to be the best? Are you focused?
Yeah.
I think it's probably one of the things, or those two things they would agree on. Maybe not entirely. Maybe they would say focus is not a complete, you know, in the bag. We got that nailed. But the other one is globalization. And I think that one is probably a bigger component than, because you have to think bigger around how do you export your products. And to some degree, I think being close to the States, you go, okay, well, it's the States, you know, that's the biggest market. I know in the book they talked about the number of hidden champions in the States was smaller. And I wonder if it's because, you know how you're saying in Germany, they had those regional areas. It wasn't a nation state until 1918, but the States has been the States for quite some time. And it's a giant market. So if you don't need to go outside of the States, you don't need to think about being global. So there's something there. I wonder if it's proximity to like these giant markets.
Maybe also it's like Europe as well. Like just functioning in Europe, it's naturally you have a whole bunch of other countries just in and around like a close proximity. Like if you think about the export side of from Canada and the United States or North and South America, if you put it in a grand spectrum, your trade partners are quite limited. You know, like if you think about Canada and the United States, it's North and South, right? Where you can have some really good concise, but like in Europe, and you can just think about the amount of countries you have proximity to. And I think that also likely plays into why there's so many. And I don't have the stats in front of like the other 1,500 companies, what kind of where they're actually in the world.
Yeah.
But I would venture to guess they're probably Europe based.
Well, there's a lot of German based language countries. So Austria was one, Switzerland was one. I think the Netherlands was big.
Which
China
doesn't
was
surprise
growing.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll be honest, like be the best. Yes, I get that. Focus. The globalization part, I think, kind of threw me a little bit in the context of it feels like it's something fundamentally different unless you just look at it through the lens of making sure the mental state or the mindset is to globalization, right? And having that ambition to reach that. It just, the way I read that just felt somewhat foreign, because like be the best is almost like I don't know how to say it. I'm struggling to find my words today, but it's almost like a North Star, right?
Yeah.
But then your ability to do that is you're maintaining focus. So I don't see that how that's a pillar. It's more of it's a function of how do you become the best? You provide relentless focus, for example, right? And then globalization, then it's, I don't know, it doesn't sit with me naturally as like a normal framework would, or like, but I don't know, I could just be misreading it.
Yeah, well, part of it to me is just thinking bigger, like expansive, right? You don't have to worry so much about what is immediately around you. If you're looking at a niche market, like those adhesives for Apple, like I think you can, if you look at global trends, there's an opportunity, and I mean, the biggest one I can think of right now is AI.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? How could you be a part of the value chain of AI? And I think that's part of the reason why things like NVIDIA is doing such a huge,
that's a good
exploding.
point.
They're definitely not a niche hidden champion. Like everybody knows about them, but I mean, they're growing like crazy in part because of these global trends.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that struck me was there's that one of the stats he had around in hidden champion companies, there's 38% of the employees that say that they're close to the customer. I think that's how he
Customer
talked about
proximity.
it. Whereas only 8% of the customer or employees say that they are in large organizations. And so that is an interesting one, because then you've got this, and the patent as well. Like so many more
95%.
patents are activated on in a hidden
Yeah.
champion organization than in a large organization. So I think there's something there that's interesting about like an agility to like respond to market dynamics, and be offensive, not offensive as in like disgusting. I mean, be on the offense
On the offense. Yep.
With what you're learning to provide more value for customers, and in this like build, measure, learn loop, I guess.
Yeah.
More so than big orgs do.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's kind of interesting.
It also doesn't it just come back to like agility, being a smaller organization, the scrappiness mentality. I would argue like these aren't small organizations though. Like these are what we're defining as mid-size global giants in essence. But I can appreciate the nuances. So yeah, you talked about the patents apply. He said like 95% of patents that are issued by those companies are actually applied in their products versus I missed the other side of that. Was it like 13% or something?
Yeah, I didn't get that number. I got 5 times more patents than the average.
Yeah. So I think like that just again it's in the natural nature of these I'm using air quotes here, calling them smaller organizations, because the moment you go global, you're not small. Let's be honest here. But I really also like he covered 2 tools. He said innovation and customer proximity are also really important in these organizations. And you highlighted customer proximity. And I think that just, I don't know, we talked to Andrea Olson about this, you know, how are you making sure you're bringing those insights internally from the customers, how CEOs could learn a lot more if they're on some of those service calls, or they kind of hear, you know, the consumer's reaction to or any sort of problems or whatever the case may be. And I think those large organizations eventually start moving away from that, unfortunately, because you just become, you deal with like your internal stakeholders more and satisfying those needs than the externalized needs of your consumers, right? So I can appreciate how that is still very important for these smaller organizations. And again, smaller, loose term here, but innovation, I think is you hear it often, you hear it thrown out a lot, but adding more meaning to that I think is important.
Yeah, and I think there was a measurement in terms of patents that he kept bringing up. So like anybody can say that they're innovative, or the number of new features, like in the a chainsaw.
Yeah, 45.
Yeah, in a single year. I mean, it's a chainsaw. I have one. It's awesome. I love the chainsaw, but I mean, that's a lot of things to improve on. But even at that, like you and I both ride bikes. Every year, there's like, I mean, year to year, there's not often massive leaps. But if you look at a bike, and then 5 years later you look at a bike, it's pretty dramatic how much change there is.
Yeah.
So there's a component to that that I think a lot of organizations have. The other one, though, that I thought was really interesting was that we were talking to him about how do you grow from a small business, small, medium enterprise into a hidden champion. One of the things he talked about is that hidden champions invest 50% more in employee education.
In education, yeah.
Which is really interesting, because these are things that, like investing into long-term growth, investing into, he had that example, it was 22 years for their company to develop that product, investing in employee education. These are things that are not like going to generate a return today.
No.
But it's components of what makes companies great.
Because there's also the side of it where you feel like you probably have the right people in place with the right state of mind. And we can talk about leadership here in a second, but and because of that, you're willing to invest in their continued education and their growth. I think that bodes well for these smaller organizations to position themselves as leaders eventually in global economies. So while this idea is not new, the application of it is somewhat, if you think about like budget cut seasons, what gets cut, training and development, marketing, sponsorships, etc. But like it's one of those things that's often on the chopping block. I would argue that these organizations are probably prioritizing things like education, which is important. And the other side was like they've moved to having more college educated workforce as well, versus not. So then it's just essentially internally, it's kind of raising that level of knowledge, aptitude, etc. So I think that's interesting. The last thing for me is like just kind of highlighting the leadership traits that he was speaking about. Make sure they're they're really ambitious. Single-mindedness, unlimited stamina. I absolutely love that. I think that one resonated with me. I would argue persistence there, and then the ability to ignite passion in others. Yeah, like I think those are really, when you have all those qualities in a leader, I think a lot of great things can happen. Yeah, those ones are hard to come by, to be honest. And we're able to share all those traits, but I like that as a blueprint, though.
Yeah, totally. It reminded me a lot, or I was thinking a lot about, there's a book called Drive by Dan Pink, and there's a wicked TED Talk, even one of those ones that has like the drawings and the animation as he's talking. It's great.
Amazing.
So you can look at pictures while you're
amazing.
Learning. Yeah, it's great. But in that, he talks about it, like the key for employee motivation is autonomy, mastery, and sense of purpose. So it kind of is, well, almost exactly what Hermann was talking about with the idea of mission-oriented leadership instead of process-oriented leadership.
Yeah.
That's the autonomy part. Autonomy, mastery is the education component, and a sense of purpose is, he had talked about igniting the flame in other people. So I think, there's a lot of really interesting components there, and it might be that those are kind of companies that just have that style of leadership nailed.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Such a fascinating conversation with Hermann again, honestly. Like he's wealth of knowledge.
Totally. Yeah. It was really interesting kind of asking him about all this and the profit part. Well, we didn't talk about that, but just the profitability. I know that's what I always associate him with is profit, pricing. And I think you can compete without having to be the smallest or the lowest price.
No. And I think like the nicheness of a lot of these organizations is probably a huge, it allows them to maintain focus on something that is very specific. Which then I think, again, when you orientate education and things like that around this one idea that we do glue, this is what we do. Our innovation roadmaps are, how do we become better at this? Like it becomes I think it becomes a little bit easier when sometimes these large organizations, you do everything. You have a lot of different, disciplines. So I wonder if there's something there too. But no, it was a fantastic conversation once again. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah. One fitting ending for having Hermann on comes up right now. Ready, V? We'll do this together. 1, 2, 3. Go chase profitability.
Let's go chase that. Go chase that profitability, man. Hermann loves it. Approved by Hermann Simon. This message has been approved by Hermann Simon. There we go. That's better. This is awesome.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, man. Take care.